Hi, everyone. Really happy to be presenting at this conference. In my book, Shakespeare Dwelling, I developed the idea of the softscape to describe the forms of temporary architecture that use textiles, arbors, and ambiance to assemble settings of hospitality and care in Shakespeare. In my remarks today, I'm going to be revisiting this softscape in the context of wisdom literature. By wisdom literature, I mean both the books of the Hebrew Bible, identified as wisdom, and the wider Mediterranean discourse, in which woman wisdom appears as a designer and hostess of curated experiences. So I'm going to begin with ancient wisdom literature, and then I'll turn to Cymbeline and Antony and Cleopatra, where ancient Isis, woman wisdom, and their Hellenistic avatars mobilize the soft power of fabrics and fragrances. I'm going to be focusing on Cleopatra on the Cydnus, the scene in which she first encountered Mark Antony, and which is featured in Imogen's bedroom in Cymbeline as the first tapestry that the villainous Iachimo observes and notes when he steals into her bedroom. The book of Proverbs includes some of the oldest and also some of the most recent layers of the Hebrew wisdom books. And it's really interesting that Egypt is present from the beginning to those later layers of composition and editing. The instruction of a metope was composed in Egypt by the 11th century BCE, and it shows up more or less verbatim as Book of Proverbs 22-23. And the instruction of a metope also leaves its mark throughout the Book of Proverbs as a whole. Proverbs 1-9, the beautiful poetic prologue to the Book of Proverbs as a whole, reflects more recent discourses that may be Persianate and even Hellenistic. This poetic prologue introduces the character of woman wisdom, Hokmah in the Hebrew, as well as the strange woman, the Isha Zara, and her shadow, Lady Folly. The Book of Proverbs ends with more concrete embodiments of female wisdom in the figure of the woman of valor or virtuous woman. So it's really interesting that wisdom assumes a female form across the work and will become Sophia in the Greek wisdom texts of the Septuagint. Woman wisdom is a complex composite and monotheistic rehabilitation of Near Eastern goddesses. Anchor Bible editor Michael V. Fox finds the closest analog in Isis, not so much in her native Egyptian form as in the universalistic international persona she acquired in Hellenistic times. As the consummately wise goddess, Isis had the epithets phronesis, intelligence, and Sophia, wisdom. Hellenistic eretologies of Isis, which were inscribed in Isis temples across the Mediterranean, proclaim her international status as a universal condensation of multiple goddesses. Shakespeare would have known the eretology of Isis in The Golden Ass by the North African novelist and Neoplatonist Apuleius.
I am she that is the natural mother of all things, mistress and governess of all the elements, the initial progeny of worlds, chief of the powers divine, queen of heaven, the principle of the gods celestial, the light of the goddesses. At my will, the planets of the air, the wholesome winds of the seas, and the silences of hell be disposed. My name, my divinity, is adored throughout all the world, in diverse manners, in variable customs, and in many names. For the Phrygians call me the mother of the gods. The Athenians, Minerva. The Cyprians, Venus. But principally, the Ethiopians, which dwell in the Orient, and the Egyptians, which are excellent in all kind of ancient doctrine, and by their proper ceremonies accustomed to worship me, do call me Queen Isis.
Wow. Apuleius, himself a North African, emphasizes both the international dispersal of Isis and her origins in Egypt. Isis embodies natura naturans, the creative capacity of nature as seed bank and ordering potentiality, or what Apuleius's Elizabethan translator calls the initial progeny of worlds, a phrase handled by Titania in A Midsummer Night's Dream, Shakespeare's most Apuleian text. I'd like to speak about design in this context, insofar as design involves the planning, sketching, outlining, or conceptualization of spaces, objects, and experiences. Design is ideational and compositional, touching upon the Platonic idea. Apuleius was a Platonist, and thus involves wisdom in its intellective and form-generating capacities. Woman wisdom is also a designer, expressing God's creative capacities. Woman wisdom may reflect Greek philosophizing as well as Egyptian and Canaanite religion. Let's listen to the erotology that wisdom delivers in Proverbs 8.
The Lord brought me forth as the first of his works. Before his deeds of old, I was formed long ages ago, at the very beginning, when the world came to be. When there were no watery depths, I was given birth. When there were no springs overflowing with water, then I was constantly at his side. And I was daily his delight, rejoicing always before him, rejoicing in his whole world and delighting in mankind.
So wisdom precedes the construction of the world itself because wisdom concerns the designing of creation, its conceptualization and initial composition, or what Apuleius calls the initial progeny of worlds. Wisdom's designs are a form of pleasurable cogitation and free association, what we now call brainstorming. God, in relationship to wisdom, organizes the primal chaos of ancient creation myths, an unbounded sea of forces and energies, into something beautiful and bearable, something rich and strange. Woman wisdom, no longer a goddess, is born from a translation process by which monotheism arises out of and responds to polytheistic articulations of the cosmos. Wisdom is figured as both a consort present with God at creation and a daughter sporting before him. Her frolicking is linked to the playful Leviathan in Psalm 104. There go the ships. There is that Leviathan whom thou hast made to play therein. Both wisdom and Leviathan are beings that emerge from the depths of polytheism, and become identified not only with God's power, but also with God's pleasure and amusement. This element of play yields an aesthetic dimension that will resonate in Neoplatonic theories of art. And indeed, in Two Gentlemen of Verona, Shakespeare presents Orpheus as a Thracian David, whose golden touch could soften steel and stones, make tigers tame, and huge leviathans forsake unsounded deeps to dance on sands. In Proverbs 9, woman wisdom becomes an architect and a hostess. Wisdom has built her house and hewn out her 7 pillars. She hath killed her victuals, drawn her wine, and prepared her table. In her house of wisdom, Hokmah hosts a Hellenistic symposium that combines serious study with the real pleasures of food and wine. Wisdom's vibrant feast is contrasted with the pale offerings of Lady Folly, who serves stolen waters and invites death. Woman wisdom is also contrasted with the strange woman, or Isha Zara, who has decked her bed with ornaments, carpets, and laces of Egypt, and perfumed her bed with myrrh, aloes, and cinnamon. Inhabiting an exotic softscape, her strangeness describes her status as another man's wife, but also her possible association with foreign cults. In 1 Kings 10, the Queen of Sheba visits the international court of Solomon as a fellow lover of wisdom. Sheba combines elements of the strange woman and woman wisdom. Sheba also merges with the dark-skinned Shulamite in the Song of Songs, another Solomonic wisdom text. In the Anchor Bible, Fox suggests that Proverbs 1 through 9 were written during the early Hellenistic period. The prologue's Hellenistic affinities are amplified in the deuterocanonical wisdom texts, which have only survived in Greek as part of the Septuagint, the Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible, reputedly commissioned by the Ptolemies in Egypt. The Wisdom of Solomon, also called the Book of Wisdom, was, like the Septuagint itself, likely composed in Alexandria, whose large, vibrant Jewish community spoke Greek, not Hebrew. In his Eratology of Sophia, the Solomonic author writes, "For in her is an understanding spirit, holy, one only, manifold, subtle, lively, clear. For wisdom is more moving than any motion. She passeth and goeth through all things." The passage exemplifies what Howard Cagill calls the Alexandrian aesthetic, quote, characterized by the processions between the many and the one, between dispersal and unification, between the senses and the intellect. Leo Perdue compares the creative plasticity of the Septuagint Sophia to the fire and air of Stoic Pneuma. In Rabbinic Judaism, wisdom becomes the Shekinah, God's feminine aspect and indwelling presence. Shekinah is from shakan, to dwell. The Shekinah was identified with the pillar of cloud that descended over the tabernacle or Mishkan, also from Shekan, in Exodus and Leviticus. As Hokmah, Sophia, and Shekinah, woman wisdom passes through Canaanite, Egyptian, Hebrew, and Hellenistic scenographies of knowledge, and her delightful plasticity mirrors the variety of the natural world alongside wisdom's soft skills and soft power. Later in the book of Proverbs, wisdom is associated with real women engaged in actual housekeeping. A wise woman buildeth her house, but the foolish destroyeth it with her own hands. The book of Proverbs ends with a fascinating monologue by the mother of King Lemuel, who chastises her son for womanizing and drinking too much. So who is King Lemuel? Well, if King Lemuel is Solomon, as some commentators believed, this would make the speaker Bathsheba, a woman with her own complex marital history, to say the least. Bathsheba was a popular subject for needlework and tapestries. Whoever she is, the mother of Lemuel's status as queen consort parallels wisdom's relationship to God in Proverbs 8. The maternal speaker caps her harangue to her son with an encomium of the woman of valor, including her many soft skills. She seeketh wool and flax. Her family is clothed in scarlet. She maketh herself carpets. She maketh sheets and selleth them. And in an image that evokes the mythological origins of woman wisdom, the woman of valor is compared to a ship. She is like the ships of merchants. She bringeth her food from afar. The simile recalls the navigational goddesses of the Mediterranean, outfitted with sails and sail-like garments, as well as wisdom's own emergence from the inchoate depths of polytheism. This is the marine Venus, or Venus Pelagia, from Pompeii. This is Isis Pelagia, accompanied by a sail and trailing a sail-like garment behind her. And here's a votary lamp shaped like a ship carrying Isis. In Proverbs 31, Hokmah Sophia's sublime softscape of ideas in motion materializes in the flax, carpets, linens, and sheets of the virtuous wife's enterprising handicraft. And this wife continues to drag cosmic memories in her billowing fabric wake. So, what about Shakespeare? In Two Gentlemen of Verona, Lance's itemization of his rustic girlfriend's domestic virtues reads like a parody of Proverbs 31. In 1 Henry 4, Falstaff declares that, quote, wisdom cries out in the streets and no man regards it, a screaming reference to Proverbs 1:20. Wisdom crieth without and putteth her voice in the streets. What interests me, however, is not simply the uptake of Proverbs into discussions of wisdom and folly, a very venerable Erasmian project, but also the pluralistic coloring of Proverbs by pagan mythology, Hellenistic philosophizing, and Alexandrian cosmopolitanism. For example, when Othello laments that the fountain from which my current runs has become a cistern for foul toads, he is likely alluding to Proverbs 5:15, 18, which contrasts the clean waters of one's own well and the dirty waters of the strangers with thee. Othello is representing Desdemona as the strange woman, the Isha Zara, and perhaps also projecting his heightened sense of his own foreignness onto his wife. The Egyptian Sibyl, who wove the fateful handkerchief, she belongs to a pluralistic wisdom tradition memorialized by Michelangelo and other artists who assemble pagan wisdom priestesses alongside Hebrew prophets. Venice itself is an Alexandrian space, looking east to Byzantium and the Ottoman Empire, and hosting a confederated Jewish community that included Ashkenazi, Sephardic, Levantine, and Italian Jews. Othello's Alexandrian strand shapes the mythographic softscapes of Shakespeare's late works, especially Cymbeline and Antony and Cleopatra. Like the mother of Lemuel, Cleopatra is a queen, she's a woman of valor, and she's a gifted speaker who composes her own wisdom poems. Like the Queen of Sheba, Cleopatra orchestrates hospitality in a cross-cultural encounter between distinct wisdom traditions. Like the Shulamite in the Song of Songs, Cleopatra exalts in the praise of male beauty, and she freely chooses her beloved. All of these wisdom figures, moreover, are potentially racialized through their association with the strange woman and the polyistic background and context of Hebrew wisdom literature. Plutarch and Shakespeare's renditions of Cleopatra at Cydnus draw on those marine goddesses of the Mediterranean who emerge from the sea, while Cleopatra's final apotheosis resembles the Shekinah, or pillar of fire, that approaches from the desert in Exodus and the Song of Songs. Cleopatra, herself a Hebrew speaker, descended from the royal family, reputed to have commissioned the Septuagint, and the play's Alexandrian aesthetic is suffused with intimations of the Judeo-Greek Sophia in dialogue with Isis and Venus. In Cymbeline, Iachimo begins his inventory of Imogen's room with Cleopatra's tapestry.
First, her bedchamber, where I confess I slept not, but profess how that was well worth watching. It was hanged with tapestry of silk and silver, the story proud Cleopatra when she met her Roman, and Cydnus swelled above the banks, or for the press of boats or pride. A piece of work so bravely done, so rich, that it did strive in workmanship and value, which I wondered could be so rarely and exactly wrought, since the true life on't was—
Well, this is true, and this you might have heard of here.
The choice of Cleopatra for the rooms of a great lady is not unprecedented. Bess of Hardwicke, working in collaboration with her famous inmate Mary Stuart, included Cleopatra in her textile gallery of noble women, where the Egyptian queen was flanked by the two cardinal virtues of fortitude and justice. This Cleopatra was indeed a woman of valor, identified with sovereign virtues. The image is lost, but it would have been similar to these virtue portraits of Lucretia and Penelope. Proverbs 31 offered a template for women like Bess of Hardwicke to use proverbs and figures of female valor and sapience in needlework and home decor, as Susan Fry documents in Pens and Needles. Bess of Hardwicke and Imogen of Britain join that tradition. In Cymbeline, Shakespeare's Iachimo is, of course, recalling Enobarbus in Antony and Cleopatra.
The barge she sat in, like a burnished throne, burned on the water. The poop was beaten gold, purple the sails, and so perfumed that the winds were lovesick with them. The oars were silver, which to the tune of flutes kept stroke, and made the water which they beat to follow faster as amorous of their strokes. For her own person, it beggared all description. She did lie in her pavilion of cloth of gold, of tissue, all picturing that Venus where we see the fancy outwork nature. On each side her stood pretty dimpled boys, like smiling cupids, with diverse coloured fans, whose winds did seem to glow the delicate cheeks which they did cool, and what they undid, did.
Ooh, rare for Antony.
Her gentlewomen, like the Nereides, so many mermaids, tended her in the eyes and made their bends adornings. At the helm, a seeming mermaid steers. The silken tackles swell with the touches of those flower-soft hands that yearly frame the office. From the barge, a strange, invisible perfume hits the sense of the adjacent wharfs. The city casts her people out upon her, and Antony, enthroned in the marketplace, did sit alone, whistling to the air, which but for vacancy had gone to gaze on Cleopatra too, and made a gap in nature.
Rare Egyptian.
Both passages are markedly pictorial. Iachimo describes a tapestry, while Enobarbus calls up the pageant he witnessed, itself composed as a moving picture, a tableau vivant. Like Bess of Hardwicke, Imogen is the designer of her room. The historical Cleopatra is the designer of the original spectacle, having choreographed the fabrics, costumes, music, and fragrances that shape her entrance into Tarsus. Both Enobarbus and Iachimo recollect these pictures of Venus Cleopatra from the distance of Rome while restaging their own bedazzlement, composing new pictures for their interlocutors and audiences. William Heckscher argues that the historical Cleopatra carefully staged her arrival as an adventus, or royal entry. She clearly borrowed iconography from the Venus Anadyomene, Venus emerging from the sea on a marine vessel with rippling veils. In this fresco from Pompeii, notice how the conch vessel's folds are echoed in the ripples and folds of her sail-like costume. Cleopatra also likely drew on Isis, who by then had merged with the cult of Aphrodite, including her marine aspect. Venus Pelagia and Isis Pelagia share the motif of sails doubled by billowing garment. Enobarbus says, the silken tackle swell, indicating the filling of the sails by the amorous breeze. For Iachimo, it is the Cydnus itself that swells. In Iachimo's speech, the Argentine weaving of silk and silver becomes one with the winds and waters it depicts. The poetry itself is silky with sibilance. In both cases, Cleopatra orchestrates her divine appearing out of the water, her royal person merging with her bedecked barge. What is a diplomatic mission is also a kind of water festival, like this Medici water festival in Bayonne in 1565. Notice the Leviathan in the background, or the entertainment at Elvetham that may lie behind A Midsummer Night's Dream. An Egyptian analog is the Navigium Isidis. That was the annual water festival for Isis, described by Apuleius at length in The Golden Ass, and another possible source for the Cydnus scene. Cleopatra's entrance is imagery with an argument. Barbara Bono argues that the scene on the Cydnus celebrates Venus Isis in her generative and cosmic powers. Heckscher suggests that Cleopatra was also engaging with these goddesses as wisdom deities. Such intermedial spatializations of philosophy through the person of Isis was part of the Egyptian goddesses' Hellenistic legacy. Here, the temple of Isis and Osiris at Marathon was a mise en scène, a kind of philosophical theme park of Plutarch's Platonist essay of Isis and Osiris. The royal entry of Cleopatra as Isis Venus also bears a possible Hebrew wisdom connection. A series of images associate Cleopatra at Cydnus with the embassy of the Queen of Sheba to the court of Solomon. Indeed, a masque of Solomon and Sheba had been performed at court in 1606 and may have provided a topical context for Antony and Cleopatra. In this study from the mid-17th century, Cleopatra is disembarked. You can see the barge in the background, and in the foreground, she greets Antony. It's clearly modeled on a type of Solomon and Sheba, as in this manuscript illumination from 1390, or the baptistry doors in Florence, or this beautiful lunette from 1475. This image by Holbein is rather different, but notice how he identifies Solomon with Henry VIII. The scene is often featured in the decorative arts, such as this embroidered pillow from the mid-17th century. And typologically, Sheba's gift-giving associates her with the three magi in the Nativity story. One of the things which interests me is the extent to which both Cymbeline and, perversely, Antony and Cleopatra are nativity plays. What we have in all of these images are scenes of elaborate gift-giving, diplomacy, and hospitality. Often racialized and erotically charged, Sheba is embedded in an international wisdom context. The Song of Songs celebrates Solomon's marriage to the Shulamite, sometimes identified with Sheba, and sometimes with the Pharaoh's daughter of 1 Kings 3. Here you see the Shulamite as a dark-skinned woman, reflecting Song of Songs 1:4. I am black, O daughters of Jerusalem, but comely as the tents of Kedar and as the curtains of Solomon. Notice the comparison of the Shulamite with forms of soft architecture, which are picked up in this painting in the canopied bed and altar. In the Song of Songs, the shimmering arrival of the bride entrances the poet beholder, like Enobarbus at Cydnus. Who is she that cometh up out of the wilderness, like pillars of smoke, perfumed with myrrh and incense? In these overlapping theopolitical erotic spectacles, royal lovers from far-flung kingdoms join in a messianic union. Notice how the Shulamite becomes one with the Shekinah, or pillar of fire in the wilderness. Here are royal entries of Sheba and Cleopatra depicted on marriage cassone, and therefore part of wedding stories in domestic decor. In the Song of Songs, the arrival of the Shulamite is conjured into the theater of expectant consciousness by the shimmering beauty of the approaching bride. Compare Shakespeare's atmospheric phenomenology to Rubens' Baroque rendering of Solomon and Sheba. In Rubens' exultant pictorialism, a kind of perceptual pavilion, cloth of gold, takes shape in the reflective sheen cast by veils, vases, and fringed and floating baldachin. Everything melts into air in the transfigurative perspective from below. And Rubens clearly learned from Tintoretto, who participated in that Venetian Alexandrian pictorialism that I think is so important to Shakespeare. Okay, so let's bring this back to our two plays. Imogen's bedroom is the site of failed hospitality, since Iachimo uses the fiction of diplomatic gift-giving to spirit himself into her bedroom. Imogen's house of wisdom includes a tapestry of Cleopatra. This tapestry highlights the relevance of Cleopatra to women's sapiential aspirations and their role as designers and curators of theatrical and domestic softscapes. The tapestry's shimmering silk and silver also evokes the Alexandrian pictorialism of the original scene. Alexandrian Cleopatra is Isis and Venus, goddess of Greece, Rome, and Egypt. She's also the Queen of Sheba and the Pharaoh's daughter, lovers of Solomonic wisdom in the Hebrew Bible. And similarly, Imogen's decor contrasts the Hebrew cherubim on the fretted golden ceiling with the pagan Cupid andirons guarding the fireplace. In both plays, the scene at Cydnus shares Greek and Egyptian motifs with Solomonic wisdom writings, crowned by the infinite variety of Sophia herself. The scene on the Cydnus is a visual wisdom canticle, a billowing softscape of images, affects, and ideas in motion. At the end of Antony and Cleopatra, the Alexandrian queen retreats to her final house of wisdom, her monument abutting the temple of Isis. There, this woman of valor delivers two great wisdom poems. First, her elegy for Antony echoes the blason of the Shulamite for Solomon in the Song of Songs. Both women declare the beauty of their lovers in language that bridges the cosmos. And that playful Leviathan of Psalm 104 becomes the dancing dolphin of Antony's erotic sport. His delights were dolphin-like. They showed his back above the element they lived in. Cleopatra's Isis-like keening is both elegy and epithalamium. Approaching her own death, she declares, "Bring me my robes, I am again for Cydnus." As Camilla Caparici argues, Cleopatra is, quote, "now more than ever, the black and beautiful bride of the Song of Songs, longing to be reunited with her bridegroom." She dedicates her own person to fire and air, evoking the Shekinah issuing from the desert in Exodus and the Song of Songs. The promise of transfiguration in the earlier scene now energizes her immortal longings. As has often been remarked, the play is rife with allusions to the Book of Revelations, and Cleopatra's final apotheosis reflects the apocalyptic woman who merges Mary, Sophia, and the Shulamite, and is often pictured with a dragon or serpent at her feet. This image illustrates both Proverbs 8 and the wisdom of Solomon. In Cleopatra's last rites, Alexandrian translation projects, Epicurean feasting, Hellenistic art forms, Hebrew poetry, and the monuments and memories of Egyptian wisdom melt into each other under the dazzling direction of a female curator and stage designer who wills her own becoming idea. No wonder Imogen wants to keep house with her. Let's give the last words to Cleopatra.
Give me my robe. Put on my crown. I have immortal longings in me. Now no more the juice of Egypt's grape shall moist this lip. Yar, yar, good Iris, quick. Methinks I hear Antony call. I see him rouse himself to praise my noble act. I hear him mock the luck of Caesar, which the gods give men to excuse their after wrath. Husband, I come. Now to that name my courage prove my title. I am fire and air. My other elements I give to baser life. So, have you done? Come then, and take the last warmth of my lip. Farewell, kind Charmian. Iris, long farewell. Have I the aspic in my lips? Dost fall? If thou and nature can so gently part, the stroke of death is as a lover's pinch, which hurts and is desired. Dost thou lie still? If thus thou vanishest, thou tells the world it is not worth leave taking. This proves me base. If first she meet the curled Antony, he'll make demand of her and spend that kiss which is my heaven to have. Come, thou mortal wretch, with thy sharp teeth, this knot intrinsicate of life at once untie. Poor venomous fool, be angry and dispatch. Oh, couldst thou speak that I might hear thee call great Caesar ass unpolicied? Oh, peace, peace. Dost thou not see my baby at my breast, that sucks the nurse asleep. Oh, as sweet as balm, as soft as air, as gentle. Oh, Antony. Nay, I will take thee too.